Hello, everybody. This is the Right Honorable, and I've been using Anchor now for a couple months, and I have to say it's very, very user-friendly, and it's a good way to get your podcast kind of up off the ground. So I would suggest, if you want to get in the podcast game, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. They'll automatically submit your podcast for approval to places like Podbean or Google Podcasts or Spotify, and that will help you grow your audience if you're looking to get into this game. I think it's a real positive way to get started. So I suggest download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Well, we got more Minnesota mischief, don't we? We got the Chauvin verdict, which kind of went as I expected it. Guilty on all counts. Second-degree murder, third-degree murder, manslaughter. Amazing. Only it really isn't amazing when you kind of know how the area is and how it's set up. Then you had the Brooklyn Center cop, the woman who accidentally shot when she was supposed to use her taser. Kill the guy. So they had to riot over that. So it's a complete... You may ask yourself, what happened here? Isn't this like the Midwest? How come this state has become such a liberal shithole? You got Ilhan Omar. What the fuck is going on with this place? Well, I lived there. A little backstory of this place. I've kind of said this before. I'll kind of expand on this. I lived there for 10 years in the Twin Cities area. So within that 10 years, I was able to observe really how things go there and the goings on. And it's a very strange place with some the biggest cucked people in the world, I think, is kind of the easy explanation. Basically, I mean, in some ways, it's kind of similar to other areas where you've got your urbanites versus the rural people. I know Minnesota was settled like every other Midwestern state. The whole economy was based on agriculture. I mean, now it's kind of a financial center. So I don't know how that exactly came about. They went from a typical Midwestern economy to having a lot of a financial center. Politically, they're a little strange in that the Democrat Party is called the Democrat Farmer Labor Party, the DFL. I think this is unique, and I think this may have attracted some nefarious characters, and it continues to this day. Seemingly, they import a lot of people from New York, so much so that I think it was the 1980s. These people, when they go to the imports from the East Coast, like Jared Fry, the mayor, is not even from the area. He's an import from the East Coast. It is just amazing the number they've done in this population on the Goyim. They've somehow imported these people from the East Coast to tell them that they're shitty people, and they believe it, and they amplify it. And it's become this thing where if you're from Minnesota, you simultaneously make fun of yourself for being shitty and mediocre, but you're very parochial and protective of that fact somehow. But you feel inferior at the same time you're parochial. I don't know how this happens. But in the 1980s, I know I'm stumbling around here, but I'm trying to paint this picture correctly. In the 1980s, they had a public relations firm they wanted a slogan for Minneapolis because, of course, they felt like their people from New York must have made fun of them because they're, call them a hayseed or something. So they started this program, and they wanted to be known as the Mini Apple. Like New York is the Big Apple, they're the Mini Apple. I mean, is that the most Jewish thing you've ever heard of in your life, or what? I mean, It fell in his face. It was ridiculous. People laughed at him. It's just fucking stupid. So they've got their little lame museums and their art houses, and it's, oh, this is culture. Look at us, we're cultured. So then I think that's probably the people that are imported from the East Coast as well. You've got a lot of failed leftist politicians through the years. The Humphrey family, Hubert Humphrey. I don't know what happened. Or Walter Mondale is the latest one. Did he croak, or is he just about to croak or something? A fucking loser, basically. Walter Mondale, one of the biggest, just a zero, right? Just a boring loser. Like, Hubert Humphrey was a huge fucking loser, right? And of course, his whole family's in politics. And, they don't do anything for a living. They just are in politics. And the left-wing guys who actually are in politics, the ones that aren't imported from the East Coast, are just bigger failures. They're bigger disasters. Betsy Hodges was the mayor of Minneapolis. I'm not even sure where she's from. She might have been a local, but she was a complete disgrace. The remaining left of center people didn't even like her. R.T. Ryback was actually a pretty famous guy, but he was like a Green Party. I don't know what happened to the fucking Green Party, by the way. But they had, the Green Party is like red. But they had some people that, I would take the Green Party these days compared to the freaking Democratic Socialist retards that you have. But R.T. Ryback was a famous guy. One of the guys that did the biggest amount of damage, though, was a guy by the name of Mark Dayton. Now, Dayton's is a high-end, relatively high-end clothing store. But that family is most famous now for owning Target. So he is the money behind Target, his family. And he is the one who really ratcheted up the importation of Somalians. And, well, if you don't like it, then you can just leave because we're going to do it. It reminded me of that fucking weasel from San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, who's now the governor. When he decided he was going to run gay marriage through everybody, even though it was opposed. If you poll the people, they don't like it. But, he shamed them into doing stuff. That's basically how they operate, I think, is they shame Minnesotans into going for all this far left shit. And if you don't agree with it, what are you, a bigot? Oh my God, no. Because racism is the worst crime in America. And when you have a population that's been so brainwashed over the years, they import these people from the East Coast to tell them that they're mediocre, to tell them that they're shitty people, and they better shape up. Because you want to be cool like the people from New York. You want to be like the mini Apple. So you better implement these policies of replacing your native population with Somalians. Otherwise, you're going to be like the Wisconsin. They look down upon people from Wisconsin and the Dakotas and in Iowa because they're better. Even though it's literally the exact same population that settled it. Literally the exact same. But, somehow the imaginary border between these four states is supposed to mean something. Well, the only thing it means is we have more shitty imports from the East Coast that tell us to do anything and have done so for decades and decades. They've had I think they'd had one of their U.S. senators has been a Jew since the 1940s or something like that. Rudy Boschwitz, he was a Republican, I believe. So it doesn't matter if they're Republican or liberal, but they always have one of them. Al Franken, if you remember, was a senator. Norm Coleman, just the biggest neocon cucks that you could possibly think of on the right, and the biggest shit-lib, left-wing lunatics that you can think of on the left. And that is your Minnesota representation. And they're proud of themselves. They're proud of themselves for being a fucking embarrassment and having the biggest lunatics possible. Oh, look at us. We're progressive. And they just love themselves. Because, again, they've convinced, the imports from the East Coast have convinced them that they have to do this, because they're less than people. There was a book written by Garrison Keillor, again, of course, Minnesota is very mediocre, called A Prairie Home Companion. And now this guy did a radio show on public radio. And again, it's MPR, Minnesota Public Radio, because NPR isn't good enough, because they're special. So they have MPR, not NPR. This is, again, where people go because they don't want to listen to the corporate media. So what CNN tells them isn't good enough. They have to get it from the independent source, the state-run, the communist media. But they call it MPR because they're special. So anyway, this idiot runs his radio show where he just literally makes fun of everybody from outstate Minnesota for hours and hours, and these fucking cucks who probably are 1 to 3 generations away from farm communities. And they probably had at one point in their lives, their relatives got their farm foreclosed upon by a Jewish banker, so that they could expand the Twin Cities out into the country land. But they happily just eat the shit that they're shoveled. They happily just live on this. So this guy basically every story he tells, Minnesota, and just makes fun of the people from the country for hours and hours. And this guy ran this radio show for years and years. One of the statements is, Minnesota, the land where all the children are above average. And that's typical, right? It's really shitting on them, but it's sort of half-assed kind of praising them. So, my children is above average. But, by definition, of course, you can't have that many people above average. But, I mean, if you talk about the white kids and compare them to the other ones, maybe. So how did this happen? How did you get this uprising of nativists? Well, where do these people come from? Well, Chicago was the genesis, I think, the first place where a lot of these gangbangers came from, and starting probably from post-World War II. Even after the Civil War, I think people started to move north, but, you really got your bad element from Chicago gangbangers who showed up here. And as recently as the 80s, the Twin Cities, I remember the Minneapolis police chief, his name was Tony Boza. He went on his way to say, oh, no, Minneapolis does not have a gang problem. But they have. Of course they have, for years and years. And the Minneapolis police have had to deal with these people for years and years and years. Now, the first area that burned down after the George Floyd incident was a place called Lake Street. Now, Lake Street is adjacent to the kind of the hip urban area called Uptown. And that's where all the college students are, blue-haired feminists. That's where they've congregated for years after they get a degree from one of the very, very numerous, mediocre, ostensibly Catholic colleges out there, 4-year liberal arts colleges where you get your instruction on how to be a good goyim. You get this instruction, and then, you work as a barista in Uptown, and you share an apartment with 3 other blue-haired feminists and homosexuals and what have you. And this is where the cool people live. This is where you can sit there in your stupid studio apartment or your stupid 2-bedroom apartment with your 5 roommates, and then you can look down upon everybody because you're cool and you live in Uptown and there's black people next to you. And you can go get authentic, ethnic food. Well, not anymore, though, because the blacks have burned it all down. So you don't really get that anymore. So the experience has been somewhat rendered moot, hasn't it? So that's Lake Street. It's like the 30th Street, right? So you number the streets. 20th Street is like Franklin Avenue, which is a shithole. That's where the American Indian Center is, where you can drive by and see, anywhere from 3 to 10 Indians passed out on the front lawn anywhere during the day. It's like, I don't know if they consider that like an autonomous land where they can go there and shoot up and get fucked up on Old Milwaukee and just pass out and the cops don't bug them. The shit that the Minneapolis police had to deal with, I mean, it really is something else. So, but for years and years, it was just, we knew that people lived in Lake Street and they're, in Uptown, I should say, and there the shit lives, and they graduated from fucking, the stupid colleges that don't teach you anything, and they're baristas, and they live their way, okay, and they had to deal with black crime, and they just pretend it doesn't exist, because if you do, then you're a racist, and, you can't be a racist, because that's the worst thing possible, and there's plenty of people there in the DFL apparatus that are going to tell you that, and, this Minnesota legislature is always kind of built like that too. You're probably like anywhere else. You have your Republicans. Some of them are very conservative. Some of them are very liberal. And you got Democrats. But now nearly all of the Democrats, I should say nearly all, from my observation, nearly all of the Jews in the local houses are Democrats. And they live in places like St. Louis Park, where it's a very high Jewish population. Of course, a very rich suburb, Golden Valley. Golden Valley, there's a nice one. And a lot of them are like college professors, so they have a lockdown on certain areas where you have literally insane people, old, insane Jewish women, like, fuck was her name? I can't remember. There's an insane Jewish woman that her area in the Minnesota House of Representatives was basically the University of Minnesota. So she had basically ran unopposed every how many years. So she gets to introduce things like they should allow 16-year-olds to vote. Or was it down to even 13? I mean, this is just, when you look at this woman, it's just, she looks like a complete fucking lunatic. The Aretha grandmother, she looks like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, only like more liberal looking. Like, she makes Ruth Bader Ginsburg look like a typical suburban housewife. Anyway, it's people like that. It doesn't matter what your name is. But these people would hold their constituency dearly, so they kind of gerrymandered it to where they have control over everything. And then you have the illusion of your statewide races. And I don't think they've had a Republican governor since Tim Pawlenty, which is probably 20 years ago, or damn near 20 years ago. So they have a lockdown on this place. So, when something like this happens where I think it's just a critical mass of instruction. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. How do you get to this point? Well, there's no opposition. There's no opposition from the right. The only guy who had a brain in his shoulders and was on the right was a guy named Jason Lewis, who has lost twice now to Angie something. One of them was a statewide Senate race, I think, and the other one was a U.S. Senate race, or U.S. House of Representative race it was, and he lost. He's a smart guy. He was a radio host. He was the only real challenge, I think, to the leftist ideology, and he wasn't like, of course he wasn't like far right or anything, right? He's a smart guy. He knew that government sucked, and he was sort of a libertarian slant to him, so he was the man for the time in, say, 2005-ish, right? 2000 to 2005-ish. So he could equally rip on Republicans and Democrats. So Republicans for being complete cucks and being complete, even though that word wasn't in the vernacular. They're phony, they lie, they don't say what they're going to do, and Of course, he could rip on liberals because all they are is just special interest at the time. Now that they've got explicitly into white hatred, I don't know that he's probably the guy to repeat that message anymore. And he was not really edgy, but a lot of the shit that they threw at him was like, "Oh, you're mean to women," and things like that. It wasn't anything significant. It was kind of like a Kavanaugh situation where they made shit up out of thin air. But no one actually outright accused him of rape because he's just a normal person. Probably he wasn't a big enough target, and they figured he was going to lose anyway, so they didn't really have to go to those big guns for somebody like Jason Lewis in a House of Representative race. It's not that big of an office, really. But since he's been gone, what you have now are just pathetic, kosher, so-called conservatives who, they immediately don't like Donald Trump because he says mean words. It's okay they don't criticize Trump for not acting what he's going to say. They criticize him for, being uncouth because they're playing the part of their game. They're the Midwesterners. They're above everyone else, right? Because they don't behave like that. They don't say things like grab him like the pussy. Oh my God, how could we ever have someone like this in our office? What about our conservative values, Goy? So the only people that are left in the so-called conservative movement in Minnesota are people that are so watered down and kosher that it's just an obvious, if something is right in front of you, like the hatred for white people, and it's so fucking obvious that who's doing it, and there's just a complete lack of criticism of certain things, you know what I mean? It becomes like a joke, It's just like, how can I take you seriously when you've got these serious problems? You've got all these people from, like, nobody says anything about the people coming in from the East Coast of a certain ethnicity and running everything. You don't have to be explicit about that, but it's just like, even Alex Jones will say something to this effect, Even the national people will, on occasion, like Tucker Carlson, will say, what is the ADL doing? These people won't even mention the ADL. That's completely off bounds, for example. That offends their delicate sensibilities. You can't question, okay, why is Norm Coleman, your beloved Republican here, why does he walk on water? Why can't you criticize anything Norm Coleman does when he's a fucking neocon? And as soon as he got out of office, he was like ambassador to Saudi Arabia or something. Or like he worked for some company for Saudi Arabia. It wasn't even that. He's an obvious crook, right? They have so many shitty people in politics, and they just have huge blind spots in certain areas. And forget about, it's just amazing to see them hem and haw over, these protests and, all the violence that they see, and they just can't figure out why. They can't, how does this happen? I don't know. We love gay people. They go out of the way to say how much they love gay people, how much they love the minorities, and they don't even understand that the other side is literally hating. It's a literal hatred of white people. They explicitly say it. Okay, they explicitly say this. And they can't even put two and two together to figure out that there's going to be two different rules. That, Keith Ellison, he's a Muslim. They'll make fun of Muslims all day long. But they won't explicitly, they won't even repeat what the other side says, okay? Ilhan Omar talking about, all white people are racist and you have critical race theory. And, well, who's doing this? Not. So that's the frustrating part. I haven't lived there for a long time, but I sort of keep up. And, once in a while I'll try to check it on and check the temperature. And it's the same thing. It's worse. It's far worse. They hate Trump because he says mean words. Forget about the issues that they actually brought to the table. They don't care about, they want legal immigration. It's like the cuckiest Republican you could imagine, only amplified. And on both sides, it's really amplified. the anti-white people, the our values, any losing strategy. It's basically a conquered people, and they're just repeating the propaganda talking points from both sides of the kosher sandwich, so to speak. And it's really pathetic. And I don't think it's ever going to change there. There are some people, the only way it's going to change is if, you have people that are going to be from out of state that are historically in the historical populations have to somehow take over. But I don't know how they're going to do that because they don't have anything. It's like they don't have any news stations. They don't have the papers. And they've been systematically ripped on for, decades and decades. These people from the East Coast come in and tell them how terrible they are. So now it's just a fact of life that people who don't live in the Twin Cities are just racists, and that's it. You don't need evidence. There is no evidence because they don't. They've never had a cock in their mouth, so that means they're racists. Basically, it's just you can't win. You can't win, and there are some people standing up. There are some groups in St. Cloud that have stood up to the Somali immigration. The mayor of St. Cloud is a guy named Dave Kleiss, who is a fucking little loser. He's a manlet, a loser. The last time I saw him, I was at a high school party, as I was in high school, and this idiot showed up, and he was trying to awkwardly hit on high school women, and everyone who was at the party, like, look at this fucking loser. He was half passed out. He never did anything because he was fucking passed out, and he's a drunk loser showing up to a high school party. Fast forward 20 years later, the guy's the mayor of St. Cloud and bringing in Somalians left and right and saying how wonderful they are. He's a guy who sold his soul for the people from the East Coast that they import. And that's all it is. These fucking losers who get in charge, who tell you that you're terrible people, and you better listen to us. You want to be a good Minnesotan, don't you? Don't you want to be a good little Minnesotan there? Don't you want to import Somalians who tell you that all you white people are racists? What, are you a racist? You don't want to be like Wisconsin, do you? And that's how it goes. These people are defeated. They've been beaten down for years and years. And the only ones left are the ones who don't live outstate. And they're already working on them by calling them racist for merely being white. And that's how this state works. And if you start to see things through that lens, then you understand why literally everything works out the way it does. And they allow for, Black Lives Matter protesters to literally run the whole show, running through the streets and shit. And, harass people from getting to their own homes, like they did in Stillwater the other day. This is why these things happen. How will it work? I don't know. We'll see.